All right, welcome back to our second episode of our family history. We are going through the life of LeRoy, and he is our great grandfather. And so this is chapter 2. Well, our chapter 2. I think we're still in chapter 1 actually. Okay, so last we got to that he was born on September 13th, 1907, and his mom said it was hotter than blazes, and this was in California. They went to that that little area that had that mountain by it in
California. Yeah.
And it had that flood. Okay.
Yeah.
So next it says, maybe I should say something here about the activity of the Mormons. The families that moved into the Sacramento Valley began having their regular meetings, Sunday school, church, primary, and so on. The general authorities of the church sent down one of their head men who criticized these people severely for moving into an unknown area without permission of the church. The church finally conceded and decided that there was nothing to do but let them stay. And today there's a big Mormon settlement there. There are several stakes, and there are some of the most prosperous stakes in the entire church.
Wow.
Okay. On June 21st, 1909, Mother gave birth to her sixth boy. They named him Wilfred Claude. Our family moved around quite a lot in Gridley, and finally Dad bought about 10 acres west of Gridley, where he had a little farm and ranch and several cows and horses. I had some memorable experiences on that farm. One Sunday afternoon after church, one of Mother's and Dad's friends took us on a ride, of all things in their automobile. That was my first ride in a car. It must have been about 1911 or 1912 Ford.
Wow. What?
It was also in Gridley where I saw my first airplane. It had made an emergency landing there right near town. We all went out and looked at it, and the man had landed. He had landed there and was monkeying around with it and gassing it up and getting ready for takeoff. Finally, he took off while we watched. The pilot was sitting right out in the open in the very front of the plane with a stick in front of him to guide it. I was only 6, but seeing a real plane was one of the highlights of my young life.
Whoa. That's crazy. He was doing what with the stick? Guiding it somehow?
Yeah, just like basically the joystick to control the airplane.
Holy cow. 6 years old?
Well, he was 6 years old when he saw his first airplane.
Yeah. I know. Yeah. I just looked again. Gridley is north of Sacramento. I was trying to find it, and then when you mentioned it, I was trying to find it, and I was looking south. But it's pretty north actually.
Yep. Mother tells me that I was about 2 weeks. Wait. Mother tells me when I was about 2 weeks old, I got sick. Okay, so going back in time, because he was 6 years old when he saw his airplane, but when he was 2 weeks old, they called the doctor and came to examine me, and I had malaria fever. Everyone around me was starting to get sick with malaria, and it was beginning to take its toll, especially on me. Dude, that's like back in the day when they didn't, like, malaria is a very easily solved problem now.
Yeah.
And that must have been at a time when that was, I don't know, probably way worse. I started school when I was 6. I would go for a few days and then I'd be out for a week. I'd go back and out again. In the spring of 1915, Dad had a conference with the doctor, and he said that if Dad left us there, that I would die of malaria. So Dad came up with the idea that he would send me and Mother back to Utah to spend a few months during the bad malaria season. But the doctor thought that was a bad idea.
Whoa.
Okay. So he's got malaria. He's going to die. The doctor was afraid a sudden change of climate would kill me. So after a hassle with these problems, mother and dad decided that they had better leave. They decided to sell out and move back to Utah and would take the whole summer for the trip and let me get acquainted with the climate as we slowly went into higher altitudes. Okay. On July 1st, 1915, we left Gridley in covered wagons.
Whoa.
Dad had 2 covered wagons and a white top wagon. Okay. So I don't know if that's 3 wagons. I guess so. The white top was kind of an in-between wagon, neither a buggy nor a wagon, but it was a good outfit. He had 6 horses to pull the wagon and 1 saddled horse. Dude, this is not that long ago.
That's crazy.
It's like slightly over 100 years ago. They're worried about taking horses and covered wagons.
Are they moving or just doing it for the, like, they're leaving Gridley for sure, or they're just going to Utah for a minute or something? Do you know?
Well, I think that, actually, I'm not sure, but I think they finally decided to just move back.
Oh, okay. Okay.
We weren't the only ones in the valley to be unhappy because the same day another family left by the name of Wills Johns. Miss Carrie Johns was Aunt Annie's daughter. Okay. They left with us and were headed back to Idaho. Another family by the name of Webster joined us. Don't we have family that's also named Webster?
Yeah.
And we all pulled out of town in a caravan. We headed up toward Redding and turned east up to the foothills of the Sierra Nevada mountains. On the 4th day out, on the 4th of July, we found snow up in the mountains, snow drifts among big high timber.
Yeah.
I asked Mother if I could get out of bed. I had been in bed from the time we left and probably a long time before we left. And she said, well, if you feel like it, you may get up and go out.
I thought he was sick after he was like 2 weeks old.
Well, he was sick since he was 2 weeks old. So from 2 weeks old all the way until he was 7 years old or whatever, he had malaria. And it was finally so bad that he thought he was going to die, or that his family thought he was going to die.
Oh, I didn't know it lasted long. I thought it was like a couple weeks or something.
I don't know that much about malaria, but I guess he had it for that whole time.
Okay.
So Mother said that he could go out and play. I could see the other kids playing out in the creek bed and picking up rocks, and I thought I might want to play with them. So I got dressed and went out and played with them. The snowdrift that we saw in the high pines was the first snow I'd ever seen. We had a lot of fun playing and throwing snowballs. I went to bed that night feeling pretty good. I stayed up all that next day, believe it or not, and I have never felt malaria fever since.
Whoa.
So somehow he cured him.
The snowball.
Yeah, the snowball. We talked quite a bit about this trip as the years went by, and Dad and Mother told me how they supplied themselves with groceries, so they thought we could make it through the 3 months. Dude, that's crazy. 3 months supply of food to go 3 states over.
Yeah.
We had an ample supply of beans, potatoes, rice, raisins, canned milk, and Dad had a 12-gauge shotgun. And then it says, hey, incidentally, we had a rifle too, a 40-82. Never heard of a 40-82.
Yeah.
I don't know what that is. I'm sure Dad didn't have any shells for it, but he had the rifle. Yeah, do you want to look that up? I wonder what a 40-80-82 rifle looks like.
Yeah, it's right here. When I googled it, it said 4082 Winchester.
Oh yeah.
Looks like a pretty old gun.
Yeah, that's sweet. Yeah, that would be way cool.
He said he had it, but he probably didn't have any shells for it.
Yeah.
Okay.
That'd be way cool to have one like that.
Yeah.
And he said, I'd like to have it today. So I guess he doesn't like it. I don't know if it's in the family anymore. We would travel for about 4 or 5 hours in the morning and stop to let the horses graze while we had some lunch. Then we'd move on. Towards evening, we would look for a place where the horses could graze because they didn't have their rest and water. Because they needed their rest and water. Water was very important. We ate a lot of fish and a lot of rabbits.
Wow.
Oh, the dogs we had, 2 greyhounds and 2 others, would catch rabbits that we would eat. Dad would let sage hens. Oh, Dad would shoot sage hens, and we ate a lot of them too. We got along pretty well. That's crazy. We'd travel for about 5 or 6 days and stop for a day, like on Sunday, the Sabbath, when we would rest the horses and ourselves. Mother would get busy and bake up about a dozen loaves of bread for the next week. I'm sure we had ample supply of flour in the provisions and also salt cured bacon. Wow. Mother and Dad called it sow belly, SOU belly. On these occasions, when we'd stop for the weekend, Mother would put on a big batch of beans. Weather permitting, they'd make the fire outside and she'd cook the beans on the bonfire. I'm sure she put the beans in some bottles to soak beforehand so that it wouldn't take an extremely long time to cook them. In the wagon where we did most of the cooking, so in the wagon, they cooked the food. Okay. We had a small kitchen stove.
Yeah, and she would bake bread too somehow.
How'd they do this? Man, I can't imagine that. Like, where would you bake bread in a wagon and not burn everything to the ground? We had a small kitchen wood stove in the wagon. I remember the favorite wood we used was sagebrush. That made a quick hot fire, lasting well and went in it as we went along. The things we missed the most and were hard to get along without was fresh milk, butter, and eggs. The only shortening we could possibly have was lard. Okay. That doesn't sound very healthy. Mother did making a lot of hot cakes. And we got along fine with hot cakes for breakfast and once in a while mush. Mush didn't taste like it used to without fresh milk.
That's wild. I looked up, by the way, how to bake bread, and there's some Oregon Trail website that came up, and they would do it in a Dutch oven, which is so they would somehow get this thing real hot, and the iron, since it's so thick, I guess it can create basically like an oven type of situation.
Wow. That's crazy. Can you imagine? That would be a wild trip to go on.
Yeah. 3 months.
Yeah, 3 months to get from California. Now it takes like 3 hours, including the drive to the airport.
Yeah, crazy. Are they going back to, I can't remember if they were in Idaho. They went from Goshen to Idaho to California, but then they're going back to, it said Utah, right? I think. I guess we'll find out. But
they decided to sell out and move back to Utah.
Yeah. Okay. So they had a farm and they sold it, I guess.
Yeah, they had that 10-acre farm that they sold.
Yeah. Okay. Got
it. Okay. We headed up over the Sierras and then east through what is called Grizzly Meadows. there were just a dozen little trout streams, only 2 or 3 feet wide, filled with native brook trout, almost 12 inches long. We would catch them with a grasshopper on a pin.
What? On a pin, like PIN?
Yeah. So I don't know,
What?
like a safety pin?
Yeah, they probably just bent it. That's crazy.
That's crazy. Almost 12 inches long. It was fun catching these brook trout. We headed east into Susansville. Where's that? And I'm sure that we must have taken on provisions that were necessary there. Okay.
Susan.
Yeah, Susansville. Susanville.
Oh, yeah, Susanville. Okay, let me share.
Well,
So they were up
it's
here
fun.
somewhere. They went through all these mountains, and now, yeah. So that was the trout
Okay.
were up in here, and then Susanville. Let's turn this on. Let's see.
And then can you zoom out so that you can see like Sacramento?
Yeah. So
Okay, so yeah, they just went through that.
yeah, they're over here somewhere, and I was curious to see what this looks like. So yeah,
Yeah. Wow. That's crazy. Okay, so this confuses me, but here's the next thing. Because they just spent all that time to go up over those mountains in with all of their stuff loaded up. But then it says, on this trip we had a cousin with us, Aunt Annie's son, Lavon, Lavon, Lavin? I don't know. He wanted to go with us just for the ride. In Susansville, we put him on a train and headed him back to Gridley. And that was the last we saw of him for 18 years.
whoa.
So why didn't they take the train up to Susansville?
They got to take all their stuff. The train
I
would
guess.
probably wouldn't take all their stuff, or I don't know. Their horses. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I can't imagine that. Okay. After Susansville, we headed north towards Alturas, Alturas.
Okay.
Up through this wild country, we had troubles because water was getting scarce. At one place, we stopped where a creek came down across the road where we had spent the night. One of the horses got into some quicksand, and Dad had an awful time trying to get him out. Everything he tried failed, and I remember we had to leave the horse there. As we drove on down the road, I could hear a shot fired from the 12-gauge shotgun, and I'm sure it was the end of the horse. So that left us with one horse short.
Dang, that's super sad.
Can't believe that. Man,
Holy cow. Yeah.
that's a tough day.
Yeah. He didn't just want to leave him and let him suffer, and so he just took him out.
I guess, yeah. It's so
Dang.
sad. As we went up toward Alturas, we stopped in this little city. Okay. Since we didn't have the horse to carry all of the provisions and paraphernalia, Dad sold the other wagon. We took off with just one wagon, the white top, and an extra horse. So I guess they had to, because that horse got stuck, they had to basically cut a bunch of their stuff and sell it all.
What?
That was so sad.
How many horses did they have total? They said 3 or something, or
I think they started with 6.
oh yeah, 6. Yeah.
He had 6 horses to pull the wagons and one saddled horse, so 7 horses total.
Okay. Wow.
Man,
Okay, so there were like pulling horses and saddle horses. I guess there's a difference.
yeah,
One
maybe.
one that's like broken and trained to ride, and maybe not or something. I don't know.
Yeah. Man, I can't believe that. That'd be so sad to have to shoot your own horse.
Yeah, it's really, really sad. Alturas, by the way, is just further towards. It looks like they're going more like the northwest corner of Nevada. It's in California, but it's up in that corner. So they're going
Okay.
north.
Yeah, that makes sense because the next thing it says, Dad had planned from the beginning to head north from Susanville through Alturas to the Snake River, where he would come in contact with the old Oregon Trail. We would follow it back up the Snake River into Burley, Idaho, down
Whoa,
towards Snowville and into Tremonton, Utah. Along this trail, there was a lot of cottontail rabbits. So
that's
yeah,
cool.
that kind of makes sense that you'd go up into Idaho, avoid the giant desert, follow the Snake River, basically,
Yeah, yeah.
and then drop it down into Utah. Okay, so these rabbits, there were a lot of, they were different than any rabbit I'd ever seen before or since. They were of a blue color, a little bit larger than your regular cottontail, and excellent eating. They provided us with shooting practice and many dinners. About this time, we kids started finding Indian arrowheads.
Whoa.
On one rounded hill covered with sagebrush, we found hundreds. As we gathered, we put them in a 5-gallon oil cans. Believe it or not, when we had the third oil can filled with arrowheads, Dad said we've overdone it, and we had to dump them. We spent an hour or so going through them and just saved the real small ones. We had to throw out so many spearheads that there were 6 or 7 inches long. We ended up dumping about 200 pounds of arrowhead that day and left them lying there by the side of the road.
Whoa, I wonder how much those are worth. I don't even know if you can sell arrowheads. I know we
Yeah,
just recently had that meeting and learned a bunch about that, and there's a lot of like laws and stuff about
yeah. It probably depends a lot on what kind of land it was. Like if it was private land and you own the land, then you can do whatever you want with them. But uh, yeah, like I don't know. Definitely, there was. I'm sure not rules or laws back in that day. Like, I'm sure that wasn't a problem.
I wonder if they were all obsidian, even the big old like 7-inch spearheads, if that was uh what they made those out of. That's crazy.
Yeah, I don't know. I have no idea. Okay, well, that would be so cool if you found a giant mountain of arrowheads.
Yeah.
One day, a man rode up on a horse and talked to Dad. He asked if we had kids. Um, if hold on, he asked if we kids were sleeping out of the wagon at night. When Dad informed him we were, he advised strongly that this country is filled with rabid coyotes, and I'm afraid you might get in trouble if you leave your kids outdoors at night. It wasn't long after that we ran into coyotes that were completely nuts. They'd walk right up to you or your horses, completely unafraid. Dad killed one with the shotgun, but we took the man's advice and slept from then on in the wagon. Our dogs chased the crazy coyotes around, and one of the dogs got bitten on the tail and eventually died with the rabies.
Holy cow. And they had big old greyhounds.
Oh yeah, they had 2 greyhounds and then 2 other dogs that you didn't describe.
Wow, that's cool. Dang, that sucks though.
Okay, man, these are great stories. Okay. A strange thing happened as we stopped for lunch by some sand dunes one day. We kids went over and started playing in the sand, digging holes and things. As my brother Lynn and I were digging, we felt some hair under the sand. We frantically dug down, and of all things, out popped a big shepherd dog. We could hardly believe what had happened. The dog was exhausted, but came around after we gave it some food and water. That afternoon, a man came by and said he owned the dog. The last time he had seen the dog, it had run over to the sand dune hill while chasing a rabbit. We had guessed that this dog ran into the rabbit hole and the sand caved in on him. What a rare thing that we came along and saved the poor old dog's life.
That's so weird. That's the craziest story ever.
They're like, hey, little Sandman's going to just crawl out of this thing and out of nowhere.
And he's like 6 or 7.
Yeah, it's probably 7 or 8, something like that.
Man.
One evening when we were camped by a marshland or a slough, we kids, being like we were, pulled out our fishing tackle and proceeded to go cat fishing in the slough. We started catching fish, but back into the tullies, we could hear a ruckus maybe, and we found out that there was about 8 or 10 Indian squaws in the water taking a bath. They were splashing and jumping around in there and cackling and having a good time. They didn't pay much attention to us, and we didn't pay much attention to them. So we caught our fish, and they took their baths, and that was the way it was. Okay.
Interesting.
I remember,
And
yeah, like,
is he saying Indian people or Indian? What's a slaw? He said,
well, he said squaw, but that's just like a kind of derogatory name for an Indian nowadays. I'm sure at the time it wasn't, but
gotcha. Okay. Yeah.
so it's 10 Indian, and maybe I don't know if anyway. So yeah, there are some Indians, Native Americans, taking a bath and having fun playing in the water. And I remember one evening we had camped, taking care of our horses. Mother was preparing supper, and we were getting along fine when a big Indian buck, so that must be a man, an Indian man, walked up in front of the wagon. He banged on the front end of it and talked to Dad. He told him, "White man no camp here. White man camp over river." Okay? So Dad politely told him, "Well, we just camped here, and now we're going to get our supper. And as soon as we have our supper, we'll move over the river." The old buck said, "White man move now, no supper now." He must have had authority because he had a star on him as big as the moon. I'm sure it was as big as a grapefruit. So we packed up our little things and moved over the river. As I studied the geography and the creeks and riverlets running down through this country, it must have been the Owaihi River, Owaihi River. We were headed to the Snake River, and we were still a long way from it.
Yeah, Owyhee River. It's just in the bottom left corner of Idaho.
Okay. We must have been getting short on money now because Dad had heard that there was a need for clover seed. So we spent several days along the canal and creek banks cutting clover. After we cut it up and loaded it onto this white top buggy to take it to the mill, they would process it there and pay us for the seed that we had gotten from the clover. I don't know how we got, but I'll bet it was a tidy sum, maybe $3 or $4.
Is he saying tidy sum is like that's a lot?
Yeah,
Wow.
I think. So I think what he was saying is he's like, I don't know how much we got, but it was probably $3 or $4. And that was like a good deal.
Yeah.
Huh. All right. Well, we'll go on with just a little bit more.
Yeah.
After a day after day and week after week, we would make somewhere from 10 to 30 miles a day. We'd stop for our lunch and then for our dinner. And I remember we broke out on a big high plateau where we could see the river. As we were looking down into the Snake River Gorge, it seemed like it was miles away down this deep gorge. I remember seeing a road down there, and it looked like it was only about 2 or 3 feet wide, 1 or 2 feet wide. Um, okay. Well, we broke off of this high plateau and started down the gorge, and it was a steep, rough road. It was really rough. I remember Dad would rough lock the wagon. That means he would put a chain and lock around the upper wheel and let the horses take the wagon down over this winding dug way into the bottom of the gorge. So I think he like literally locked the wheels so that it would just skid down.
Yeah, yeah. Interesting.
When we broke out of the bottom of the river, we arrived at what is known as Glenn's Ferry. Now, this ferry was quite a contraption. When we got to the river, the ferry was on the opposite side, and there was a cable stretching across the river. The person who operated the ferry lived in a home on the opposite side to where we were. I remember a huge steel triangle that was hanging there, and we banged on this triangle. And the man came out and came across the river, loaded the wagons onto this barge, and we crossed the river. The power that was used was a gasoline motorboat. I remember Dad called it a gasoline launch. We crossed the river and went up to the other side of the gorge. Then, when we made our way slowly up the river, we would ask people as we came to them which way was a better route to travel. And we got different kinds of information. I remember one man we asked which was the best way to go. He said, "Well, I'll tell you what, the best road is down by the river. Follow up the riverbank, and it's probably the closest to. But if I were you, I'd stay up on the high banks because along the river, the people who live down there are the Mormons. And if you go down there and get in trouble, those damn Mormons will let you starve to death before they will give you any help."
What the heck?
Okay.
Those damn Mormons. That's funny.
What are they doing down there? They'll just let you starve. Okay. They'll baptize you on your way out after you starve to death. Okay. Well, as we moved on out of there, I can remember my oldest brother asking, "Dad, why didn't you punch the guy in the nose?" Needless to say, we took the lower road up the river. As we went along, we passed what is known as 1,000 Springs. It is a beautiful sight to behold if you haven't seen it. It is worth your time to go and take a look. Well,
Well,
1,000
yes.
Springs, I know. Magically, we can use our teleportation device and go there right now.
Thousand Springs State Park, it says. Let's take a look. Wow, that is cool.
Wow. Wow, that is really cool.
Huh.
All right, let's teleport back. Great Grandpa LeRoy probably could have never imagined Google. I just Google that right away. Okay. Well, we weren't too far along when we came to a little farmhouse where a family lived, and they had a real nice garden and cows and everything. We inquired and talked to them, and we found out they were those damned Mormons we'd heard about. They were really wonderful people. They invited us to stay, and we must have stayed 3 or 4 days. Us kids really filled up on fresh vegetables and milk. One evening, they invited us into their home to spend an evening, and they had acquired something I had never seen before. It was a phonograph.
Wow.
There in their living room, they had this unusual machine that they put on a cylinder type thing onto it, and through a great big horn, out came music. It was the first recorded music I ever heard. these people were really nice to us because when we left, we were loaded up with what we needed: fresh vegetables and milk. Up the river we went.
Huh.
Wow, that's
So it
crazy.
wasn't a phone. I was thinking it was going to say it was a phone, but it was just some sort of record player type thing.
Yeah, because a record before they had like disc records, they were this cylindrical device that you put on there, but it basically behaved the same as a vinyl record.
Yeah. Okay.
And yeah, so then they like, what did they play you? Like, what kind of music was available back then? Like,
Yeah.
like
Probably Queen.
yeah, yeah, AC/DC. All right. Well, anyway, I think that's a good place to stop for now.
Yeah, that was crazy.
I can't believe it.
Yeah, that's I wonder how much what the real motives were for moving back. Because I wonder how many years they were in Gridley for it. Didn't seem that long. He was
7 or
born
8
there.
He was born there.
Yeah. Huh.
Yeah. And so, well, I guess at least the story is that he was going to die from malaria and they wanted to go. Because I think what malaria is worse at, like, worse. I don't know how this thing works, but in colder environments, it's not as bad, apparently.
Yeah.
But
The
I have
snow.
no idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, the snowfalls.
Yeah.
Well, we're making our way along. We're a good chunk into this book, but we've got like a dozen more books to go through. So,
Pretty cool. This is fun.
yeah. All right. Well, and next time, I think what I'll do is make a big chart that shows everybody like who these people are and how we're connected to them, and figure out a way to do that.
Yeah, that'd be cool. Sounds good.
Okay. All right.
right.
Until next week. Adios.
See ya.